Hello again. How are you guys doing? And this is the first video since I've came back from my vacation. I was in DC. It was very fun. We saw a lot of different things, and overall it was great. We got to see a lot of different stuff. But we are, of course, come back with this new video. And this video, well, it's different from the last one because if you haven't noticed already, the gameplay is back to how it was. I actually got it to work this time, which is great. But also, we're not going to have a cut between the intro and the actual subject. So, yeah. We're gonna just, have only one cut, which is gonna be when we go to the outro. I'm just kind of experimenting, seeing how things go, does it work or not. But yeah, and I'll say that today we are talking about something similar to the thing about abolishing income tax, but it's not really the same thing. What that model I made, I'll put it on screen again if you don't remember it. That model was not made when I made the text that you're about to see in a moment here, but let's actually begin about it. So this was written back in November, and it goes like this. Income tax. I see a lot of people whine online saying that it takes money away from you, and because of this reading it should be lowered or even be abolished. What would this mean for the country? What actually happens in the economy when you tax something as significant as income? And most importantly, would this all be a good idea? This is the question I was trying to ask. I was trying to calculate what would actually happen before I even made the model, and before I really actually made, I believe I made that model a few days after writing this. So yeah, now let's actually begin. This is definitely not the most intuitive subject, so let's start somewhere. Let's say we have 100 people who each make $25 an hour. Now if they work the basic amount of time in a year, they're going to make $52,000 each annually. Now let's assume there's no income tax. They keep every dollar they make while working, okay? Now, because of the situation, are they encouraged to work more or less for that money? Well, I think it would be less, because if you don't have an income tax, these people work for much less time than otherwise. We're assuming that this is some sort of experiment where they go from paying income tax to no income tax, and so all of a sudden they can work less and live the same life, or live even a slightly better life, like how my model showed. So you can kind of see where my inspirations crossed over from there. Now what happens if we were to have an income tax like 15%? Okay, let's say we put that in this situation. These people would now have to work a bit harder to keep as much as they did before the 15% income tax, right? That also means their standard of living. To keep their standard of living, they are going to have to work about a bit more. Now, obviously, you would rather not want to work because they get less for that work. You don't want to work as much when your value, or the value you get paid, is not as much. But they still have to work more if they want to keep their standard of living. Now, what is going on here? There's two effects to consider here that usually don't really matter too much, because they tend to cancel each other out in most contexts. They usually just, ignore each other. It's like X over X or whatever. But what happens is there's an effect known as the income effect and the substitution effect. Those are two effects. The substitution effect is one that is used by the people arguing against an income tax, because when workers get less for the work, not working is more attractive because working is less attractive. Why would I want to work the same amount? Like, the amount of wanting that I want to work decreases when I get less value for it. I mean, that should be obvious, but this should also be obvious. There's the income effect, where you gotta work more to retain what you had, because otherwise you give that up, and a lot of people probably do not want to give that up. And so, because these two effects seem to usually cancel each other out, the point about the substitution effect and how the substitution effect disincentivizes workers to work when they make less, maybe it's because of taxes or something, that point is on mute, because it doesn't really matter what the worker wants. If they want to have a certain standard of living, they have to keep on working more than before. Now, what this means, now obviously I'm not saying that the income effect overrides the substitution effect, they cancel each other out, so the person ends up working about the same amount. But this only makes sense for moderate or in the middle income taxes, okay? Let's say income tax was 99%, okay? The substitution effect of your pay being so low that it's not worth it, it almost makes it as cheap, or it almost makes it as valuable to you as leisure or not working, because you're barely getting paid anything at a 99% income tax rate. So at that point, substitution effect wins. Now, if you're at 1%, then what is going to happen here? Well, then you have very little disincentive to work less from the substitution effect. Like, yeah, you get paid less, and so you want to work less, but at 1% it's barely anything, and there's a slightly larger incentive to work more at this point, because still, I mean, even if it's only 1%, you might work, say, 1% more. Now, again, you could say these cancel out, but I think that at both extremes of the tax scale, like 99% and then 1%, I think that the incentive to work more would be slightly higher. I would argue that. But at 0%, that flips on its head, okay? At 0%, it's completely different. There is no income effect at 0% because, well, there you don't have to work anymore, okay? Like, you don't have to work anymore to adjust in order to keep your standard of living. So, because of that, if, like, we just, adopted that today, we would lose a ton of our productivity, and already you might be able to see how this overlaps with what I was talking about before, okay? We would lose a lot of our productivity, right? And if that would happen, obviously our economy is not going to be too happy about that. And now, obviously, there also wouldn't be a substitution effect, but that is pretty much meaningless right now, because the substitution effect, there is no income effect, and there also can't be a substitution effect because they're not getting less for the work, and so as a result, that doesn't mean working or not working is more attractive. So in the end, both of these effects here at 0%, neither of these effects actually exist. From 1 to 100%, both of these effects exist, though at most of those degrees they tend to just, offset each other into nothingness. But at 0%, you are at the point where neither of them exist, because they rely on some level of tax. Now, one more thing, I remember, if you remember, I talked about how when a company pays workers more, they're more productive, less likely to leave, less likely to be burnout. Burnout is like when you literally just can't do it. And, decreased turnover rates, more productive because they value the job more. And the difference between is that when you just give, when you give your employees a raise. Like if you give them more money, like you tell them, hey, I see you're doing good, how about you get this extra money as pay? Well, what that does is it shows the worker that you're important to them, and what their actions have done have resulted in them being rewarded. And so why would they choose to exploit that? Why would they choose to abuse that, knowing that they're not in the position of power to do such thing? And not only that, but it also risks other things like that. One of the main founders, or one of the main theories behind efficiency wage theory, is that when you pay your workers slightly more, it decreases their motivation or incentive to fake working. And so, yeah, now when you have a just, no income tax, that isn't the same as responding to someone's actions. That's just saying, okay, so you're going to get nothing from your pay taken away. And so this means it's just a free benefit that, it isn't conditional, or it doesn't rely on anything at all that, that person is doing. So as a result of that, there's really no disincentive to just take advantage of that and, work a lot less, or possibly even fake working. So yeah, that is really what I wanted to say on this topic. These are some of my just earlier thoughts that I made about how income taxes function before I made that model. And at the end here of this message, I was already using that polling from Gallup that was talking about what amount of Americans are satisfied with their standard of living. And yeah, so I just thought it'd be interesting to make a video on this. I didn't really have I didn't have an idea really for a video, but this seemed good enough. And yeah, that's all I really wanted to say for this part of the video. So yeah. Okay, we're at the outro. I don't have much to say, but what I do have to say is that I liked how much effort I put into making the MS Paint, or whatever, 3D Paint images and graphics for this. Hopefully they made this somewhat easier to comprehend, because obviously not everyone can just listen to someone or something and instantly grasp the concept. But yeah, that's what I need to say for this outro here, and peace.